All right, what's up? What's good? So I am going to be dropping a video out. I just got the background on, seeing how this thing works. Whatever. But anyways, yeah, you got Israel to my left, you got Judah to my right, and it give you the breakdown of the bloodline history. But I'm gonna talk about this video. Ain't gonna make it long. Basically, it's talking about Martin Luther King. And it's basically talking about, is his message from Satan or is his message from God? And the video give you a good breakdown. And the person on the YouTube channel video I'm going to be sharing, his name is Untitled. Let me see his name of it real quick. Hold on. Okay. It's called Truth United. He got a website called truthunited.com. That's truth as in the truth, united as a United States, together, truthunited.com. And it gives the breaking down details and information about Martin Luther King and his message. They take you way back. And I'm not going to go into too much details about it. He's going to give you the details as you get a chance to watch this video. So this video is 49 minutes long. I'm gonna play the whole video, and or I might just two-part it or whatever, and then you just go on this web page on YouTube. You can go on the YouTube, type in the name, and watch the video yourself. And he got a lot of other videos. I put one video out last time about Oprah Winfrey and about them believing in God and stuff like that last time. So I'm gonna go ahead, drop this video, get it planned, get it rolling, and here we go. All right, so share my screen. Go to over here. Oh yeah, Truth United. All right, so you'll see that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play the video. And I am going to hold on for a second. I'm just getting used to this thing here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play the video.
When we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at
last. There is something that needs to be discussed because it is such a huge part of the invisible shackles that have been placed upon the world. There is a dream that has been sold to the world.
Because I have a dream today.
It was taught in our schools and given credibility by our governments, churches, social leaders, and activists. This subject is something that is so difficult to come against because the mind control around it is so strong. It is one of the foundations that this coming New World Order is built upon. You see, the irony and hypocrisy about the way the world is today is that so many of us are caught up in the lies and deceptions that were given to us by the same system that we know have been oppressing us our entire lives. Like, I have friends who often speak about how wicked the system is, and how much they don't trust the government, etc., etc. But all their ways and mindsets stem from the lies and deceptions that were given to them by the same system they want to rebel against. They never break away from the lies, even though they speak against the people that are giving it to them. If we do not go back and go to the root of a lie and pluck it out, you will never truly live in truth, because there are still roots of lies that are planted in you. You have to remove the root, and this subject is a major root that needs to be dug up. So here's the basis of the discussion in this video, and I want you to answer this question in your heads before I go deeper. Was the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. had given to him by Yah or by Satan? I started with this question because I don't believe that many people ever gave it much thought or even considered the importance of the answer. I mean, this dream that is used consistently by world leaders, by churches, that is taught to all of us and our children from when we are young, that is often used as a foundation for liberty and justice around the world. If this dream was given by Yahuwah, the Most High, then it is something that we obviously should connect with and follow. But if it was given by Satan, then it is possible that by following and believing in this dream, we could be attaching ourselves to a satanic agenda that we were completely unaware of. That makes sense? This question needs to be considered, especially within the group of followers within the organized Christian churches in America and abroad. To many people in that group, Dr. King was the Moses of the generation, and he was leading those who followed him to a promised land.
And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
But because of his charisma, his power in words, the grand soapbox that he was given, and the many people, important people, that supported him around the country and around the world, I mean, he was given a Nobel Peace Prize. The promised land that he was leading many people to was never actually considered what it was. It was just wrapped in a bow of liberty and equality. But the actual foundation of the dream of this promised land was never actually considered. And now it is over half a century since the end of his movement, and the world still is moving to this promised land. So it is time that we really examine what is underneath the hood. We need to really understand, was the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. had given to him by Yah or by Satan? Let's begin. Okay, so I'm going to try to go at this in a methodical approach, because I am aware that I'm coming at a subject most people are not ready to really deal with. Like I alluded to in the introduction, we have been mentally conditioned to accept this man, his dream, and his promised land as acceptable. We have been conditioned to accept him as a hero. You see, in many of my videos, particularly when speaking about the Matrix, I explain how this system works in our minds, telling us who our heroes are and who our enemies are. We believe the heroes that they have placed in our face, and they made us believe their cause. But the truth is, most people really won't understand that point unless you really understand the real world that we live in. So if your mind is not fully aware that you live in a world of lies and deception, this video may not be for you yet. I have been circling around this subject for a while, but I was really moved into it last week when I saw Zelensky bring it up in his address to Congress.
They do not defend our people. I have a dream. These words are known to each of you. Today I can say, I have a need. I need to protect our sky. I need your decision, your help, which means exactly the same you feel when you hear the words, I have a dream.
I was like, they can really just use this anytime they want. Now, I could start off and say very firmly that Martin Luther King Jr. was not our hero. He was just a house slave used to keep us in bondage. But when you give statements like that, without a proper foundational level of understanding before it, it can oftentimes just push people away before they had time to really understand the reasoning behind it. But that's how I see most people want this ministry to be. Cut deep, regardless if a foundation of understanding has been laid out or not. But that's not how I was ever led to distribute truth. So I'm going to go backwards to lay a foundation and then move forward. In order to understand the topic in full, you need to understand the times that this mindset was built in. You need a bird's eye view with a little more information than what the mainstream feeds you with. So understand a few things. You can't understand this just by jumping into the civil rights movement of the 1960s, No, you have to understand the country before this, because there were heavy false doctrines already built, and there was a division in the black community that was not known. But it is highly important to really understand these things. So we start at the first Reconstruction period. This is the period after the Civil War. We're talking post-Civil War, after Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and former slaves were promised their 40 acres and a mule from General Sherman, and the 13th Amendment was passed abolishing slavery. We start during the era of Reconstruction that was started under President Andrew Johnson. This was the period of rebuilding the United States. In May of 1865, Johnson announced his plan for presidential reconstruction. His strategy called for amnesty and restoration of property to all Southerners who swore loyalty to the Union. His strategy required Confederate leaders to ask individually for pardons, and required that all states accept the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. Johnson's strategy for Reconstruction became very lenient to white Southerners who fought against the Union, and he ordered the restoration of land to those owners. This included land from Sherman's order. This was the 40 acres and a mule land. And then Johnson declared Reconstruction complete by the end of the year. Johnson's increased alignment with the white Southerners brought criticism from Republicans, and that promise of 40 acres and a mule was rescinded. The country lured the free slaves in to fight with them to help with the war, but they decided that they were not going to rebuild the country with the mindset of equality with the former black slaves and give them land that they were owed and due. They used the slaves to win the war and then provided them with nothing. Same script that goes on today. It is important to also understand that there are many things instilled within the country that still kept the oppressing of the free slaves going. It wasn't like they were free and then they had it easy. No, they were still oppressed, but they were still striving to live and create a life for themselves. In April of the year 1866, Congress passed a civil rights bill, granting citizenship and rights to all male persons in the United States. By June of that year, Republicans had drafted the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed citizenship to anyone born or naturalized in the United States. This granted the free slaves citizenship. This bill was extremely controversial, and it was not made valid until 2 years later in 1868. And then in 1869, Congress passed the 15th Amendment to protect the right to vote, stating that no one can be denied this right based on race or previous status as an enslaved person. So we're going to stop right there. There were slaves that were made free by the government, then made citizens under the law, and then given the right to vote, though exercising that right was not easy for them. That's what needs to be understood during this period. Slaves to citizens with certain rights. Okay, let's continue. Now, during these times, as America was growing, this is also the time of the robber barons' rise to full power. During this period of the late 19th century is where we see the rise and emergence of the Rockefellers and the Morgans and other Rothschild's agents who were building their financial empire on this newly reformed country. This wealth and power can never be ignored or forgotten when understanding the world that you live in. Now, the former slaves were rebuilding as well. Their power was found within the black church. Now, this is a subject that should be covered by itself, and it needs to be covered with care. Because without proper understanding, this point that I'm about to make may confuse you. But the black church that was built during this time was not an institution that was built under the power of Yah. This is because of how they were taught and controlled under the times of slavery. The black church was more of an organization for the former black slaves. It was the one thing that the former slaves had control over in the country. So that organization was their source of strength. Now, I don't want you to confuse me and believe I said Yah was not with them. I'm just saying it wasn't built through him. Though they did praise Jesus and worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there was not a lot of truth being spread. They only understood what was given to them through control of their slave masters, and they passed down that same knowledge. There's a lot to break down within this subject that I cannot cover within this video. So at this point, if you disagree, let's just table that thought for a different time, please. The point that I am making, and that is important to take away, is that as Black America started to grow, they grew within the walls of the church. The leaders of the Black community were the leaders of their churches. But soon, there was another way for leadership in the Black community to grow. In the North, which was much different than in the South, Prince Hall Freemasonry was organized. The Negroes of the North came under the religion of Freemasonry, and it was at this time that there was a major divide within the Black community. Now, I have made a video about this subject if you want to understand more about it. I cannot explain it all here. The link to the video is in the description box. When Prince Hall Freemasonry was created and spread, there was a separation between the general mass of the free Negroes in America and the Masonic ones. But this separation was not well known because within Freemasonry, one of the biggest parts to it is based upon secrecy. So unless you were a Mason, you would not know what these people were doing in their lodges. And eventually, as Freemasonry spread amongst the Negroes, there were Prince Hall Mason lodges spread around the country, bringing the Negroes in Masonic light, moving fully away from the Most High, and moving towards a different goal. There were now two groups of the Black community. There was the initiated, those who were under that false Masonic light, and the uninitiated, those who were not and knew nothing of it. And the initiated had more power and support than the uninitiated. And the majority of the uninitiated seemed to be unaware of the divide as a whole. They didn't even have a clue, from what I understand when I speak to people of that generation. Now, a huge way this spread was these Prince Hall Masons started creating their own churches, and this is where we see the biggest group of Black churches in the country grow. The African Methodist Episcopal Church grew, and this church was created and led by Freemasons. This then gave Masonic control over to the church. And while this subsection quietly grew, there was another group of Masonic Negroes that were about creating even more division and distinction for themselves. And this was the creation of the Black Boule, the Black bourgeois class. I also made a video on this subject as well. Both this video and the Prince Hall video are highly important if you want to have a grasp on the subject. But in order to explain the Boule and then parlay it to the focus of this discussion, I will use a clip from that video to explain. We need to go back in time. Let's go back to the times of slavery. During the times of slavery, we had plantations. These were large farms in the colonies of America that used the enforced labor of slaves to harvest crops like cotton, rice, indigo, sugar, tobacco, and other farm produce for trade and export around the world. This trade and export was how America was built. On this plantation, we had two different classes or groups of people. We had the masters and the slaves. There was no crossing between these classes. A master never became a slave, and a slave never became a master. Well, that's not entirely true. Eventually, there were slaves that became slave owners, but I don't want to get off point. I'm not going to talk too much about the masters, but more about the slaves. To keep the slaves in line and know exactly what the slaves were thinking or plotting, the masters needed help. They needed allies within the slaves. So in the slave class, they created two other classes. There were the regular slaves and then the house slaves. The house Negroes, which really is known by another word that I will not use. The house slaves were taken in the house, given better food and accommodations. They were treated better and were more aligned with the slave masters than they were with their own people. This is not a recommendation, but if you ever watched that gory movie Django, the character played by Samuel L. Jackson explains this to the T. They were used by the slave masters to keep the slaves in line. The slave masters probably wouldn't have been able to keep the slaves in line as well as they did without the house slaves. Being a house slave even became a goal for some of the slaves. They wanted to be able to come inside and become house slaves themselves. Now on top of that, the slave masters would also have babies with the house slaves. They would never be equal, but they were not the bottom class slaves that had nothing and had to work outside eating the scraps. I think you get the picture. And I think for the most part, everyone should understand what the house slaves were. Now here's the question I want you to think about. After slavery, and after they reprogrammed the slaves to believe that they were free, do you think that the position of house slave went away? What I'm asking is, do you think that the slave masters, those that were running and building this country, did away with the house slave position that allowed them to keep tabs and control of the Negro community by just controlling a small few of them? The answer should be